The subject of this get together is how much we're meant to think about or factor in nitzchias, olam haba, eternity. How much is that supposed to take up in our thinking on a day-to-day basis? So there's a couple of things that we need to know. One of them is Rabbeinu Bachya teaches us that the things that were most important appear last. The things that Hashem wants most, he creates last. So, for example, the human being is the reason for creation because he is able to recognize his relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. He's able to serve him. So he's the end of the creation process. So the sof davar is sort of b'machshava tchila. So Hashem is anticipating the real purpose and creating it last. The same thing is true about Rabbeinu Bachya says about Shabbos. Shabbos is the purpose of creation. The purpose of the week is Shabbos, and Shabbos was therefore created last. The same is true with regard to Olam Haba. That Olam Haba is the purpose of creation. The purpose of everything that we are is Olam Haba, and it was created last, the same way that man was created last, the same way that Shabbos was created last, etc. So Klal Yisrael was also created last. And as the Pasuk tells us, Kodesh Yisrael Hashem Reishis Tivuasa, that Klal Yisrael is the last, just like Shabbos is the last, and just like Olam Haba is the last, and just like man is the last. So the I don't know what everybody hears about Olam Haba, but I have a sense that most people have heard silly things about Olam Haba. And for most people, it hasn't really helped them use the idea of Olam Haba well. I even heard somebody say, if you just live a good life in this world, you don't have to worry about Olam Haba. Let Olam Haba take care of itself. You just have to live a good life in this world, and it'll all take care of itself. I'd like to try that line for a balabosta to tell a housewife, don't worry about Shabbos. You just have a good week. You live a good week. Let Shabbos take care of itself. It'll take care of it. It's just a concept that doesn't. It's a little silly, but again, it's not more silly than so many of the things that we hear about Olam Haba. And for better or for worse, we end up with so much confusion that most people just don't even think about it on a practical day-to-day basis. They don't realize how central it is, that Olam Haba is absolutely central to our daily life. And that is, of course, amplified most by the first parak, the first chapter of Mesilas Yesharim, where he tells us that the foundation of everything is to figure out why we're here. And why we're here, he goes on to explain, is to enjoy, to benefit from, to partake in the closeness with Hashem, and the place for that is Olam Haba, and the place to prepare for that is Olam Hazeh. I think there's so many references to that the Olam Hazeh is a prosdor. It is for those people who think in terms of meals. I guess that works. Big banquets and meals. They think in terms of big banquets and meals. So they think in terms of the anteroom where you're preparing to go into the big banquet. So if banquets do it for you, then that's a mushal that can help you understand the relationship between Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. But the purpose of our existence here is to prepare for that Shabbos. We're supposed to be thinking about and preparing for Shabbos all week long. And some people think that Shabbos is a break. That Shabbos, you take a break on Shabbos. Shabbos is not a break. Shabbos is the purpose. In fact, there are those who understand that even a person who's learning full time, he's learning a whole week, he's actually learning to prepare for the learning that he's going to do on Shabbos. Because the learning that he does on Shabbos is the real deal. And that's not to say that the learning he does during the week is not real. But it has a sense of preparation to it, where it's preparing for the Torah of Shabbos, and certainly all of the person's spiritual efforts and energies in the course of the week are intended to give him an additional clarity to the closeness that he has to Hashem on Shabbos. And the same is true with regard to this world and this life and its preparation for that closeness that comes with the world to come, with Olam Haba. So the answer to the question of how much we're supposed to be thinking about Olam Haba is really as much as possible. Now, why do I say as much as possible? Because if you only think about Shabbos the whole week long, you might not be very effective in your job. So even though your job is to be able to provide for Shabbos, that your home should be able to have Shabbos, but you still need to focus on what you're doing. So the answer to the question of how much should you be thinking about Olam Haba should relate to the question of how much can I think about Shabbos? And the answer is as much as possible. A consciousness that I am preparing for eternity is important, but it can't be exclusive, because there is the necessity to deal with Olam Hazeh. And by the way, Chazal tell us that the more consciousness we have, the more we transform the time that we are in this world into preparation for Olam Haba. So, for example, if a person knows that in order to come close to Hashem, he needs to improve his midos, needs to always be working on refining his character so that he is more and more like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he tries to refine himself and tries to take other people into account, and he tries to conduct himself in a way that emulates Hashem, Mahu Rachum, Afatot Rachum. So he tries to be compassionate in a way that that emulates Hashem. But he also knows that if he doesn't sleep, he gets pretty cranky. And he doesn't have such great midos if he doesn't sleep. So he has in mind when he sleeps that he wants to be able to activate good midos so that he can become more approximate to Hashem, so that his eternity is more enhanced, is more credible. The same thing is true with regard to Torah. We want to learn Torah so that we are closer to the mind of Hashem, that we are delving into his expressed will as he gave us the Torah. But you also know that if you don't eat, then at a certain point it's going to be very hard to learn. And so a person is able, through this consciousness, is able to transform activities that are otherwise a little bit similar to horses, that also eat and sleep, into transcendent activities that are part of the preparation for eternity. And that changes the whole story. Because in theory, then, a person can turn a vast majority of his life into a pursuit of eternity. and that gives meaning and value to things that would otherwise have very little meaning or value, gives them existential value, it gives them eternal value, it gives them ultimate value. So, how much should a person be thinking about eternity? I think to a certain degree, we could use the analogy to Shabbos. How much should a person be thinking about Shabbos in the course of his week? The more a person thinks about Shabbos in the course of his week, the more he's able to turn the activities that he does in the course of the week into an enhancement to Shabbos. So, by way of using that as an analogy, the more a person focuses on the the fact that we're really here entirely to prepare for the pleasure of eternity helps him turn the things that he does into eternal value. And by the way, because he's thinking about eternity, a lot of the things that would get him worked up in this world shift their priority. Because I'm not going to get worked up about something that's not going to give me any access to eternity. I'm going to get worked up about those things that will help me build my relationship with the pleasures of eternity, with a closeness to Hashem. And so it allows the person to do some sifting and sorting of the things that he gets worked up about in this world. And in fact, when he finds that there are things that he doesn't understand, this whole discussion started with the Holocaust, that when a person finds that there are things that he does not understand, he asks himself, in what way will pursuing the answer to this question help me with eternity? If it does, if it helps him with eternity, then he should pursue it. If it doesn't help him with eternity, where he can't translate it into anything that is eternal, then perhaps he has to question whether it has any value in his day-to-day life. And so we come back to the question, how much should we be thinking about the eternity? And the answer is as much as possible. And as a person develops himself with an understanding that he's here to prepare for eternity, he's able to turn more and more parts of his daily life into eternity preparation. In the prosdor, in the hallway or the anteroom, preparing for the feast.